Hey there everyone, welcome to FJX 2000 Productions. Today we are going to be looking at installing this Tsunami2 Steam 2 decoder in this Proto 2000 Heritage Steam 2882. You can see it's lettered up for Denver and Rio Grande Western, my favorite road name. And I actually love this locomotive so much. I've had this for over 10 years now, probably like 15 years or so. It's been a wonderful locomotive. And I even a couple years ago at a train show found a twin for it. Its sister engine 3502. This is 3503 is the original one. Both are awesome, and I just think they're a cool, huge locomotive. Historically, these locomotives were known as the Class L107, really big engines that were used primarily, I think, in Helper, Utah to carry big trains up and over Soldier Summit. I think they would even double head these things sometimes, but they were built in 1923, and this one was retired and scrapped in 1947, and number 3503 was scrapped in 1950. Kind of sad that these big, beautiful engines didn't make it, but these were just one of the classes of 2882s that the Rio Grande had, and these were not even the most famous ones. These were USRA 2882s, so other road names had this same locomotive, and Proto did do a few different road names and numbers for these locomotives, but of course I had to get the Rio Grande ones since that's my personal favorite. I love that 3503 specifically does have some historical photos showing it in action or back in the yard in Helper, Utah, as it was being in service. So it's just a cool locomotive, cool model, but we're going to explain why we're doing the swap today. Basically, this locomotive has run flawlessly for me for years, and I'm going to start it up right now. Some nice sounds there. You can hear the dual cross compound air compressors. Air being let off. It's a cool locomotive. One of the funny things about it though is it has a crazy whistle. In my opinion, what's a crazy whistle? Sounds like an elephant. Such a loud locomotive and such a cool whistle that they gave it. I'm not sure if that's prototypical or if that's just what they decided to put in there. But either way, cool model. But what started happening was it wasn't running smoothly anymore. I would throw it into forward or backward, whatever, and it just wouldn't run smoothly. It would go fast, slow, fast, slow. It's not showing it right now. To help show the issue that started happening with this locomotive just recently, after years of owning it and never having any issues, I put it on our rollers. I don't know if you can hear the motor. I turned the volume off because it's so loud, but the motor doesn't run completely smooth at a set speed. It's kind of like winding up, then slow down, wind up, slow down. It's kind of pulsating the power. It's not just a nice, even running super smoothly. I don't know if you can hear it, but it might be hard to visualize it too, but it's something that when it's running and it's actually pulling a train, it becomes very obvious that it's just kind of going and then going fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. It's not super smooth. So I actually disassembled the locomotive and tried to see if there was binding happening in the wheels. No binding. And so then I had the idea of hooking up the tender from the other locomotive that's not having the issue, and when I swap the tenders and essentially swapping the decoders, it actually solves this issue. So I know that it's a decoder issue, and because the decoder that comes in here isn't my favorite one, I should say, I'm going to swap it out for my favorite sound decoder for steam locomotives, the Tsunami2. No doubt the best one out there. and that will make it so it's just more cohesive with the rest of my steam fleet and gives me a lot of things I can edit, and will just be a pretty cool install. So let's go ahead and get started. Though this install will really only be dealing with the tender, I did want to show off how to disassemble the boiler in case you do need to get into the mechanics that are going on up here, just because there's like nothing out there on the internet of how to do it, and if you've never done it before, it can be really difficult. So first thing you have to do, you have to pull off the steam dome. That's where the whistle is. And be careful, that whistle could break off. It might be a little fragile, but once you're able to pop that off, it just comes straight up and off. Then you have a screw with like a little spacer plate. So that's where you're gonna use your small screwdriver. You'll go ahead and undo that. And once that comes out, then the main thing holding in your boiler is just the front number plate of this locomotive, or the front boiler face. Before you can lift the boiler shell, though, off the locomotive, there's a couple little things you need to disconnect. So pay attention very carefully. Hopefully this focuses in and isn't too bad. There's a little pipe going up to the air compressor right here. That just slides down and out. Once you slide that out, that's free. Similarly, on the other side, there is another pipe, and you must slide that one down and off. Boom. Those are both free. The other thing you have to do is along the side, you have these air tanks that run right below the running boards. They have little air lines that go into the front, and those, as you lift the boiler off, will need to be removed. I'm trying to do this all with just the two hands I have, but that just will slide out. I'm just trying to use my tweezers carefully. There, we've removed one of them. You can see it's just kind of out and off to the side. There we go. So that's one of them, and you'll do the same exact thing on the opposite side of the locomotive. Let me see if I can turn it and show you. The pipes are slightly routed differently, but the idea is the same. You just slide this little guy out, ta-da, and then it's free. Perfect. We got that out of the way. Once you have those air lines disconnected, you can see my boiler is already starting to pop up. The shell is starting to come off, but we want to remove the front of that smoke box. That'll be an essential part. So you want to use like a little flathead screwdriver or something that you can get in along the side and just gently start pulling that boiler forward. Just this smoke box face. It kind of comes out from the bottom. That's where you want it to come straight out, and then it'll kind of swing up. Let me see if I can do this one-handed, or while holding the phone with the other hand. It's a little tricky with holding the camera at the same time. There we go. I'm loosening the face of our boiler just a bit. Getting that screwdriver a little further in there. Ta-da! So then that boiler face pops off. It can swing up. Great. And just like that, even though the bell wire is still attached, this can lift off and reveal everything underneath. You can see a really cool PCB board, I think is what it's called, that goes along the weight in the boiler. Two of these wires, these two that go into this front hole, those are for the headlight. These two wires are for the front wheel power pickups. You have the two wires, kind of like power connectors right here by this little orange thing. Those are the motor power connections. And then you have two more plugs right back here. And those two things are the rear wheel power pickups. And then all those 6 wires go through and underneath the cab and to our tender. So if you ever have to pop the boiler top off, now you know how to do that. But for this install, we're actually going to just be dealing with the tender. Here we have our tender disconnected. It just has a plug on the bottom that you'll pull out. The tender has its cute little doghouse, has a rear tail light, nice tender. we're going to be looking from the bottom now. There are no screws that hold the shell on, but if you look along that upper edge, there's little gaps where you can stick a screwdriver and kind of space the tender shell outwards. And if you can do that, you can kind of then lift the shell up and off. Let me see if I can show you what I'm talking about. If you look right here, I have my screwdriver. That's one of those gaps right there. And there's another one just towards the back. So, and those are on both sides. So if you're able to kind of carefully pry your screwdriver in there and then lift, I recommend lifting from the front. You can kind of get your finger right here on the metal part of the frame and this part of the shell, and then you can separate them up and off. Let me see if I can get it real quick. Just like that, we're able to get the shell off. It just pops off. There's no wires or anything to it. So you can set the tender shell off to the side. Looking on the inside of our tender, there's one speaker right here and a second speaker underneath the stock decoder. We have our tail light coming towards the back. That's what this red and black wire are for. And ultimately, there is no just standard NMRA 8-pin plug or anything. So we are going to be disconnecting this decoder and rewiring our new Tsunami2 from scratch. Off camera, I went ahead and unplugged the 4 different connectors that go to the factory decoder. And then all you have to do is undo 1 screw and 2 screws to free the decoder from the model. This one has like a little metal frame on it. Don't know why, but we'll take that off real quick. This factory decoder is a QSI decoder, and it's been fine. It's a good one, but I just like the Tsunami2's better. Now that the factory decoder has been liberated from our model, we can now look at the factory wires. You'll have to trace some of the wires to figure out what goes to what. Obviously, this one goes back to the light. You have these wires from this plug that go to the speakers. The speakers are wired up together, so you'll probably just wire those up similarly to the Tsunami decoder. Then you have these 2 wires, this black and red one, that go to the track power pickups from the tender. And then ultimately, this is the 6 wires that come from the locomotive that go to the plug in the front. I went ahead of time and I actually used a multimeter to figure out which wire goes to what, and I drew up a little guide right here. So if you look down, you can see our plate is represented by this little drawing. The top wire is a red wire, and that goes to the motor. Next is your left track. Your next one is your headlight, which is a yellow wire or orange wire, whatever that is. Then you have another headlight wire, your right track, and then your other motor wire. So both the motor wires are red, both the headlight wires are yellow, both the track wires are black. So as long as you can keep track of where the wires are coming from off of that little board, then you'll be able to keep track of which one goes to where, because you'll want to make sure you wire them up properly with your tender power pickups and so on and so forth. I now have our decoder out of its packaging, and we're going to ultimately just follow the little guide that it gives here, so that way you know what color goes to what. So like the motor wires will wire up to the motor wires coming from here. We'll splice together the power pickups from the front and the rear, so that way we're getting the right and left track powers in their proper wires. We'll get the headlights wired up, the tail lights wired up, and the speakers. And once we've gotten all of those connected, we'll be good to go. I'm going to be using shrink wrap, some electronic shrink wrapping to make sure that we're not shorting stuff out. I have a soldering iron that I'll go ahead and do this with, and that should pretty much be it. So let's get started. Okay, after a while of wiring and doing some testing, I think we've gotten it all set up. Here we have our new SoundTraxx Tsunami2 decoder. I'm using the TSU-2200 just for larger HO models. That's what is kind of required due to the amperage these things pull. I wired everything up according to the wiring diagram. The one thing that I had to do some testing was to figure out between the two headlight wires, which were the two yellow wires coming off, which one is positive and which one is negative. On the negative terminal, so the white wire and the yellow wire, going back to the decoder, you have to wire in some 1000 ohm resistors. So that's what you can see right here under the red shrink wrapping on both sides. And I figured out from my little wiring diagram that if you're looking at it this way, the yellow wire on top, that's your negative diode to the headlight, while this bottom one is your positive headlight wire. So that's how I wired it up. You can see this bottom wire is going to the blue, which is our common positive from there, and then that blue splits off and goes to our positive back here. Let's go ahead and put on the track, and you can hear it start up. Starts right up. It is already in as just 3. I'll have to program it later to the right number, but we can test our whistle. So loud without the shell on, but that sounds really good. And I think it's time for testing. If I put the reverse on, I can test the rear headlight. You can hear the dynamo turn on, and sure enough, that headlight is nice and bright, or the tail light, I should say. So now it's time to hook it up to the rest of the locomotive and button everything up. All right, I have our locomotive all buttoned up. Everything is back together. Tender is installed. Let's hear the whistle. Wow, that is incredibly loud. I'm going to be turning down the volume, I'm sure. Let's hear the bell. Bell sounds great. Put it into forward. Let's turn on the headlight. Oh, there it is. We have our headlight shining right there. And let's get her forward. Running nice and smooth. This Tsunami2 has the dynamic digital exhaust, so with more effort as it works against, it'll actually chuff louder. Wow, so awesome. Well, the install was a success. Let me edit some CVs and get it sounding more accurate. Like right now, it's only doing single chuffs, but with it being a compound locomotive, big cylinders in the front and another set of drivers with smaller cylinders in the rear, I'm gonna set it so it has kind of the articulated chuff. It has the dual cross compound. Right now, I think it's just doing a single cross compound. We'll edit the whistle, we'll edit the bell, we'll edit a bunch of things, and then it'll be ready. All right, those edits have been made. I put in a Denver and Rio Grande whistle. Sounds really good. Change the bell to the heavy brass bell. I changed the chuff to be articulated. It's quiet right now just because there's no load, but let's get it loud. And I set it so it'll slowly get in and out of being in sync. And I changed it so those air compressors on the front, since they're 2 dual cross compound ones, I changed the sound for that. So anyways, it's sounding and looking great. We have our backup light as well. The backup light is really bright, but the forward light is just so dim. But what can you do? Either way, model turned out great, sounds great, looks great. I have my other model now that I can compare it against. Maybe someday I'll do the conversion on this one as well. But for now, I'm happy to have my original model, this 3503 converted. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it was helpful. If you have one of these models or a similar model from Proto 2000, it's a great one. I recommend it if you see one up for sale. And until next time, take care.